be fair, I will generally give you a hard time when you say that. Like, I mean, things were just different back then. In what way? How were things different? Because when you say something like that, I'm not picking on you, but when you say something like that with regards to, for example, what the Nazis did, it suggests that morality was different back then. And if morality was different back then what that suggests is that there's no such thing as good and evil. There is no right and wrong. There's only opinion. And if you do believe that, then you don't really have a right to say that the Nazis were bad or evil. You might say that you disagreed with them, but you might say that you wouldn't have voted for them, which, by the way, is debatable even, because it's easy for us, here we are 80 years later, to be able to look back on it and say, I would have been different. But I asked that question early on in the semester, and I guess I'll ask it again since we're here again. Imagine yourself being a concentration camp guard back in Nazi Germany. Do you think you could have done the things that those guards did? And a lot of people will generally say, no way, man, not me. But I asked that question, and I can see there's some very honest people in here, because I saw 2 or 3 heads nod and say, yes, I could have been that person. And the truth is that you can tell from the numbers. Statistically, you would have been one of those people. Because how many guards actually said, no, I will not do this, I will take a stand? Almost none. Because, I mean, look at how weak we are today with social pressure. I mean, my goodness, all we have to do is just, all we have to do now to get you to conform is to threaten to call you bad names. And if we call you bad names with like an ism at the end, oh my God, it's even worse. And then if we put it on social media where like people might see it for like a couple of hours, dude, forget it. Life is over. Now imagine putting yourself back then, which I guess, yeah, times were different, when you weren't just being threatened to by social pressure, but by actual physical force. You've been conscripted into the military. There's a war going on. There is no, there are no police to call. It's the state that's telling you, you will do this. And you're also kind of wrapped up by everybody else around you. So there is also that social pressure. And then I guess I would ask you again, how many of us realize that we probably would have been concentration camp guards? And that's a really uncomfortable thing, because that tells us that we're capable of doing the things that most of those guys did. Now, that doesn't mean that you would have been the extreme version of it. There were, gradations of it. There were some who, of course, who were worse than others. Like Josef Mengele, who was a concentration camp doctor at Auschwitz. He was the guy who would, when they got off the trains, would tell them left, right, and he would determine whether you lived or died. That guy performed experiments on people. He really liked when they found twins, because if he had twins, he could perform experiments on them, like vivisection, if you know what that is. When you cut people open and you kind of perform not even operations, but you just cut them open just to see how the organs work. And he would do this without anesthetic while people were still fully awake with no pain relievers, because he believed that stuff would interfere with the process of his experiments. This was a guy who said, you have brown eyes. I wonder if we could give you blue eyes by sticking a needle into your eyeball and injecting it with blue dye. And so he would do stuff like that. Interestingly enough, most war criminals like that, were doctors who experiment on people, or after the war, we can usually look at their work and say, man, it was horrible what they did, but you know what, we did learn something from it. This guy, we learned nothing from him. Literally, 100%. There's nothing that he did that we look back on it and we say, oh wow, at least we can use that stuff. Like the Japanese Leninist unit, I think it was called 471, you can look it up, but it was essentially kind of like that, but they did experiments like they would take a person and they would put them in like a freezing cold environment. They'd have like holes in the walls, and then they would force them to stick their arms out of the wall into the freezing cold where the snow was. They'd spray their arms with water so their arms would freeze, just intentionally to give them frostbite and gangrene so they could try treating it. They would take people's arms and they would put them in the liquid ice, stuff that dry ice, so that your arm would just completely freezes, and then they would shatter your arm until they could see how they could treat it. All of course, again, without anesthetic, without any pain relievers. But we did learn some things from those experiments. We learned nothing from Mengele's experiments. This guy just seemed to enjoy it. By the way, the guy had two earned doctorates. He had a PhD in philosophy and a medical degree. So oftentimes we think, well, we need to put the intelligent people in charge. The people with the advanced degrees, the experts, put them in charge. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, everybody in Hitler's inner circle had a PhD, a university degree, an advanced university degree. Berlin, Germany was the most educated population in the world at the time. So there's no correlation between degrees and morality. But one thing I will say is the same from back then is that we do make that mistake still. We think we need to get the most intelligent people and then they'll make the best decisions for us. No, the most intelligent people do not have your best interests in heart. And by the way, intelligence doesn't just mean if you have a university degree. Elon Musk does not have a PhD. Jeff Bezos does not have a PhD. What's his name? Steve Jobs did not even have a bachelor's degree. The most innovative, intelligent people are not the ones who typically get those kinds of things. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm saying they typically don't. And so we have to be careful with stuff like that. It's a trip, man. I think back to it. My grandfather, he was in Auschwitz. So it's a trip to me to think like Mengele would send people left, right, and if he had just said a different word, I wouldn't be here. By the way, the point of that whole story, Mengele volunteered for extra shifts. He really enjoyed that work, telling people they could live or die. The other two concentration camp doctors, there were 3 of them there, they used to have to get drunk so that they could make those, so that when the people came off of the trains, they could tell them left, right. They were so horrified by what they were doing, they knew it, they were aware of it, but they had to get drunk just so they could do it. Mengele volunteered for extra shifts. So you got 3 doctors, 2 of them didn't want to do it. They did it because of pressure. So we have to be careful when we degrade people for the kinds of things that they do under pressure. We oftentimes think like, I would never. And by the way, even if you wouldn't, and even if you haven't, if you can prove that you wouldn't, you at least recognize that you're the exception. That you're the exception. And then don't hold everybody else to that same kind of, I don't know, like hatred standard, I don't know how else to phrase it. Sorry, it's a long interlude. Others.